Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Finnish Institute and the seminar Energy Security Agenda for Finland and Sweden. 2 years ago, Finnish Institute in Stockholm started to organize seminars on the current issues as foreign and security policy, economic policy and education. Our ambition is to be an arena for a bilateral dialogue between Finland and Sweden and to present Finland as an interesting and relevant example in the Swedish debate. Today's item is energy security. The current crisis between Russia, Ukraine and the European Union has really put the energy security and the distribution of energy resources on the top of the political agenda. It has a big implication on the Nordic state, particularly on Finland, since Finland imports almost the whole consumption of natural gas from Russia. How would the Ukrainian crisis affect the Nordic countries, and especially Finland and Sweden? What kind of cooperation will be necessary? And will these crises, as energy crises before in the history, force us to seek for new solutions and new forms of cooperation? And in this case, what kind of solutions and what kind of cooperation? These are the questions and many more that will be dealt with during this afternoon. I would like to thank Global Challenge for a very fruitful cooperation during the preparation of this seminar, and we will continue to cooperate. The next item will be the future for the forest industry in Finland and Sweden, on a seminar in the end of November. We will put more information about this on our website as soon as we have it. I also would like to inform you that this seminar will be streamed, and in a couple of days it will be possible to see it on the web, linked from both our webpage and from Global Challenge websites. So please use microphone when you are asking questions. Once more, warmly welcome, and I now would like to give the floor to Kristina Persson, the founder and the chairperson of Global Challenge.
Hello, good afternoon everybody, ladies and gentlemen. I happen to have been also the president of Pohjola Norden, Pohjola Norden as they say in Finland, or the association, the Nordic Association in Sweden. And I am since long a strong believer in the need of strengthened Nordic cooperation. And one reason for that, I think there's echo here. Is it better when I speak close, or it's better when I speak like that? Yes. Yeah, it's better like that. Okay. So one reason for that is that globalization is gradually making the individual nation states less and less capable of solving the most fundamental challenges of our time. A secure energy supply is one global challenge, but this also goes for the economy, and for the welfare state, and for our democracy. And everything is, of course, part of the same whole. This is what has inspired Global Utmaning from the very beginning, soon 10 years ago, that the time for linear or sectorial approaches in problem solving in our societies is over. However, this is not yet reflected in our institutions, how they are built and how they work. I personally think that civil society and business, the kind of actors who have gathered here today, can do a lot more to show governments and authorities the need and potential for change, how institutions work. And we already see that the private companies are taking the lead in the green transformation, lying before, being ahead of governments many times. But there are, of course, many fundamental problems to be solved by the governments, who need to put the right conditions in place to make a market-driven transformation possible. In order to give inspiration to governments, Global Utmaning took the initiative some years ago to start the Nordic Action Group for Energy and Climate, shortened NAG, N-A-G. We publicized our first report in 2013. It looks like this. It's finished, but you can download it from our website if you like. And now we are continuing this work. We have started two projects, one in collaboration with the German think tank, Agora Energiewende in Berlin, which is about Nordic-German collaboration as a step towards a European energy union, which we think is needed. And the other one is about the transport system, how to make a fossil fuel-free transport system. Okay, is that better? Yeah, it is. Good. How to make a fossil-free transport system possible. This has been decided by government and the parliament that we will have a fossil-free transport system, or fossil-independent transport system in 2030. But long before that, long before 2030, very soon actually, Sweden will have to take many important decisions in relation to our energy system and our energy supply. And we share a lot of these problems, Finland and Sweden. We have both high dependency on base industries like paper and pulp, and we have, I believe, the most competitive paper and pulp industry in the world, due to cutting-edge technology, high productivity. So I very much look forward to listen to the interventions, the speeches this afternoon, and the discussion. And once again, a warm welcome on behalf of Global Utmaning, Global Challenges. And I pass the word over to our moderator for this day, this afternoon, Maria Wetterstrand. The floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. So you received the introduction from Anders Eriksson and Kristina Persson to this seminar, which will try to connect the issues of energy security with an agenda for a greener energy future, and also to economical sustainability, because that is a great challenge that we have ahead of us, and it is really a hot topic right now. And the first speaker will put this issue into a geopolitical context by talking about what the situation is today in Russia, the Russian energy policy, and also connect that to the European energy security issue. And our first speaker is Veli-Pekka. He's a professor in Russian energy policy at the Aleksandr Institute at University of Helsinki. Please welcome. Yes, I'll leave that here.
Okay, thank you. Very pleased to be invited into this kind of discussion and seminar that touches those issues that I've been following several years during my career. I'm Veli-Pekka from the University of Helsinki, from the Aleksandr Institute and Department of Social Research. These are the issues that I will touch today, so I'll try to cover basically Russian energy diplomacy in this present situation and differentiate it between how Russia behaves with Ukraine, with that situation that we have in the rest of Europe, for example, Western European countries and EU member states. And I have also, in a way, tried to find out a solution how to escape the risks that are related to this, in a way, Russian energy diplomacy. First of all, a few words about Russian energy sector. It's of course, I think most of you clear that Russia is an energy giant. As you can see, not very clearly, it's very dark, I'm sorry, but you can see that Russia is a major energy producer in nearly all the fossil sectors. from oil, gas, coal, and uranium. Russia is also very dependent on energy production and energy sales, and it can be argued that Russia is a so-called petrostate, more or less. That means that energy plays a dominant role in Russian politics and also affects the way Russia develops. And this is a discussion I won't go deeper into today, but it's an interesting also academic discussion concerning this, and it's related to the so-called resource curse issue. Russia itself is a big user of fossil energy, and gas, of course, plays a dominant role in the Russian domestic sector. And if you look at the Russian export commodities, you can see that Russia is very much a raw material exporter, and more than 80% of Russia's export are raw materials and energy, basically energy up to 70%. If you compare the trade between the two major partners, economic partners in the Eurasian context, that's Russia and the EU, you can see that the Russian energy export dominates what concerns Russian exports. And EU, of course, is a major machinery and manufactured good exporter to Russia. Then, if you look at the domestic context in Russia, and we look at the domestic political situation, and we look at how energy is being utilized and how energy is, so to say, constructed as part of the political context in Russia, we can see that this kind of hydrocarbon culture is being created. During the last 15 years, we have seen that this argument that Russia is an energy superpower and it's been sold for the Russian populace. And this is, of course, by no means a foreign idea. For example, if you look at the Finnish discussion during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, that we are a forest giant, and this is part of our identity. But then again, if you look at the situation during the Ukrainian crisis, you can see that this identity construction in Russia has also political implication in a way that it's been sold for the Russian audience by the Putin regime that Europe cannot stop us in Crimea or in eastern Ukraine because Europe is so chronically dependent on Russian energy. So regardless of the fact how Russia has utilized or not utilized energy as a foreign policy tool in Europe or Eastern Europe, this has domestic implications, the way energy is being constructed, part of the Russian politics. Then if you look at the situation in Ukraine, we can clearly say that from the collapse of Soviet Union up till now, especially gas has been a major tool to control Ukraine. It has been a sort of carrot and stick policy by Moscow, but the basic idea is that with pricing and with also coercion, Moscow has tried to keep in power a pro-Moscow government in Kiev, and that's basically the underlying issue in this energy diplomacy with Ukraine. And you can argue that more or less this kind of energy weapon has been utilized towards Ukraine. And the fact that Ukraine is chronically dependent on Russian energy has been guaranteed via the fact that severe corruption related to this energy trade. Ukraine is a major transit country for Russian energy, and corruption related to this energy trade and transit trade in a way is one of those issues that has guaranteed that Ukrainian government has been in a way dependent on Moscow. And also this has affected strongly on the diversification efforts by Ukraine to move away from, for example, Russian gas. And of course, at the moment, the situation with Crimea and especially Donetsk region as well, we can see that Ukraine at the moment actually becomes even more chronically dependent on Russian energy because the hydrocarbons, old hydrocarbons that Ukraine had in the Crimea and offshore areas of Black Sea, but also new hydrocarbons, for example, shale gas deposits, those are partly in the areas that are controlled by the separatists and Moscow. And also, because of Donetsk region is a major coal production region, also part of this capacity is in the hands of separatists and Moscow. And also interesting, in a way, a specific topic is the solar power issue. Ukraine lost by losing Crimea 2 of their major solar power stations. And in a way, all these put together makes Ukrainian situation in this, at this spot very, very difficult, and makes Ukraine an even weaker state than before, if possible. And for example, last week I was in Russia and following the news, and it's very interesting that how this energy superpower discourse is being, for example, discussed when the outside temperature in Kiev is being monitored all the time. When the temperature drops, Russian influence gets stronger because Ukraine is chronically dependent on Russian gas. Well, then coming back to, or going to the EU context, of course, it's clear that, and we know that the flow of energy from Soviet Union and Russia has been more or less uninterrupted, and this is a thing that the Russians are very proud of. And this is of course true up till 2009 energy gas dispute between Ukraine, EU and Russia. And it was of course only a couple of weeks, but still Russians, they are very proud of this situation that energy has flown uninterrupted. Whereas if we look at in general how Russia has, what kind of policies, energy policies Russia has had, of course this relates primarily to the oils, to the gas sector. We can say that Russia has utilized the so-called soft energy weapon towards EU countries, in a way making European countries to compete for these more or less sweetened deals, that the better conditions Gazprom has got in delivery businesses, in storage businesses in Europe, the lower the price. And this is of course the state plays a role in this business by subsidizing these procedures. So you can say that this kind of soft divide and rule tactic has been successful in the European space, as Russia and Gazprom has managed to increase ownership in EU's downstream businesses and develop these major energy projects, that is the Nord Stream that is running and South Stream that probably will be materialized. And of course, what the ultimate goal of this from the Russian point of view, and there's of course there's a economic logic there behind, but there's also a political logic to in a way to prevent EU's common energy policy that would in a way combat this in a way divide and rule tactic that Russia has been successful in. So I will stop here by giving some views about the solutions to this problem, how to combat this divide and rule that we find also in the Western European space. So one major issue is that we should form a buyer's cartel in the EU area, and of course this concerns gas first and foremost. And we should have one gas deal with Gazprom, and this of course would minimize Russia's influence in EU's energy, but also foreign policies. And what is important in this situation, while we're having the war in Ukraine and the crisis in Europe, that we actually by forming this buyer's cartel, we could actually escape the present trend of diversifying away from Russian energy in general. But we can rely in future in Russian energy, but with more on a safe ground when constructing this kind of institutional actor, a unitary actor in energy policy in European space. And of course, the second thing, what we need is diversification of our energy palettes in European member states. And I would, in a way, say, of course, this is, I'm a Finnish person, so I say that this is a Finnish-German model, but I think you can find other countries as well that are performing similarly. But the basic issue is that we should have energy system, energy palette where none of the sectors dominate. So basically we should rely on renewables, we should rely partly on coal, we should rely on oil, we should rely on gas and hydropower, nuclear power, to have it this kind of a diversified palette in the energy sector. But of course, looking to the future, we need more renewable energies that are domestic. And that's, of course, one of the directions we should be moving towards the future. And of course, Russian gas plays a major role in this transformation towards more renewable energy. And in this respect, I would argue that by forming this buyers' cartel, we could, in a way, secure our energy future much more better. And not, of course, let Russia to concentrate only on, for example, Chinese markets. And this way, of course, we can have this open discussion with Russia also via the energy sector. So, okay, I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. So, one thing that comes to mind listening to you is the question: how big a risk is it that Russia would use this dependency that the European Union have on Russian energy against us?
Well,
in a more direct way.
In a direct way, basically, it's of course it's very hard to prove. But if you think of EU member states that have a very high percentage of dependence on Russian energy, and you have energy companies that are active in domestic politics and policies, it's clear, thinking from layman's perspective, for example, that this kind of influence in the energy sector has also influence on the domestic and on foreign policies that these EU member states can perform. So basically it can be this kind of more understanding of Russia's, for example, great power interests in Ukraine, for example.
Like if a country is very dependent on Russian energy, they will think very much about what do Russia think about the policies we do, foreign policies.
I think much more than in a situation that we would be less dependent on Russian energy. So this kind of, in a way, effect I see that there's clearly is in that kind of situation.
Also in Finland.
Also in Finland. Definitely. But of course, our strength, as I try to explain here, is that none of the sectors dominate. Of course, if you look at the fossil energy import, that's mainly from Russia. But then again, we have a quite significant share of renewable energy production in Finland. And for example, the major political risk area, which is the gas, despite the fact that 100% of our gas comes from Russia, gas constitutes only 8% of our energy palette. So in a way, this diversification is also a means to combat these risks.
Yeah. Also, Sweden is quite dependent on oil, for example, from Russia. So after each speaker, if there is time, I will try to give the floor also to you if you have some question to the speaker. So now we have 1 or 2 minutes. So please, if you something that you've been thinking about, then you will have the microphone and you can ask a question. So just raise a hand. We have one in the middle and one here.
Yes, thank you. My name is Jarmo Vina. I'm the Finnish ambassador here in Stockholm. I just wanted to ask from the professor, you just explained about the dependence in Europe on Russian energy supplies. Would you elaborate a little bit about the Russian dependency on the markets in Europe?
That's a very good question, and actually up till the Ukrainian crisis, I would say that the discourse in Europe has been, and of course it's a fact on paper, that Russia actually is much more dependent on Europe as a market for their energy resources than Europe is dependent on Russian energy. We know that it's only about 1/3 of energy that we import from Russia, so the rest of the energy comes from somewhere else. So in a way, Europe is not dependent. But it seems that during the crisis, as we see that now the sanctions that were put forward only this autumn actually have some kind of effect on Russian policies. So if you think of the situation during the spring, there was very great reluctance in the European countries to push forward sanctions against Russia that concern the energy sector. And in a sense, you could argue that this, in a way, the more tighter energy or higher dependence in domestic policies in European member states is actually higher than the dependence that Russia has on Europe. You can argue it this way. Of course, I have no definite answer to that. This is just, in a way, speculation.
And we have a question down there in the middle.
Yes, my name is Bojan Hellers from the Royal Institute of Technology here in Stockholm. I was wondering, what is the potential of the domestic power supplies in the Ukraine? You didn't really mention that, I think.
No.
And I thought it would be very interesting to know whether they have resources of their own to omit or to reduce the threats from Russia in the energy sector.
Yes, concerning the energy sector, that's also a very good question. If you think of Ukrainian energy palette, it's very much a nuclear dominated. For example, electricity, more than half of electricity is produced by nuclear, and that is Russian nuclear, basically. So Rosatom is a major player there, and that, of course, despite the fact that during this war and crisis, the nuclear sector has been in a way aside of all these debates concerning the crisis, but of course it's a fact that affects also the discussions and negotiations between Ukraine and Russia concerning the gas dispute, it is very acute. So Ukraine is very dependent on Russian energy, and of course the way I tried to explain also the situation in Crimea and Donbas region, that makes the situation even worse. But of course Ukraine is a very southern country, so Ukraine could also rely much more on renewable energies. And I mentioned these two major solar power stations in Crimea. That's a good example that there is potential in this side as well. But that's of course a longer perspective. There's shale gas deposits that can be utilized and so on.
Okay, thank you. Actually, we have to move on to the next speaker. There will be also possibility, maybe during the coffee break, if you're still here, if you have a question, so we can continue then. So we thank you for now, Veli-Pekka Tynkkynen. So now we've learned a bit more about the trade between the European Union or the European countries and Russia when it comes to energy. And now even before the Ukrainian crisis, we had a discussion in the European Union about how to reach a more low carbon energy sector, and we have discussed also climate change as a big threat to the humanity in the long run. So this is a work that's been going on a long time, and we want to know now how is it going right now, the low carbon transformation in European electricity. What have we learned so far, and what are the challenges ahead? And we will listen to Arne Mogren, who is director of the Power Program European Climate Foundation. Please.
So thanks a lot for inviting me. I would like to start with my favorite slide, just to give it some sort of background and underline the importance of electricity. Electricity was introduced, commercial electricity supply was introduced 132 years ago in a tiny system in the center of New York. In just some few years, it has transformed the economy totally. And that is still going on. I will come back to that. So I just have to press the right button. Yeah. So if we look at the situation we are in today, both globally and especially in Europe, we can see that we have started on a journey where renewable resources really start to play a role. But we are still in the very beginning of this journey, because 2050, we need to have a much more advanced system where we have integrated different energy resources, and electricity will have to play a much, much bigger role. For example, this is an outcome of a study done by the European Commission, demonstrating that today electricity on average in Europe is on the level 20% of final gross demand. Around 2050, it needs to be around 40%. This has been confirmed by studies that the European Climate Foundation has been doing. It is confirmed by Eurelectric, the European Electricity Association, of course. But it is clearly so that a more secure, a more reliable, and a more sustainable energy system will demand much more electricity. And I will say just some few words about what is ongoing and what we have to do. So first of all, I think that we have to go for the quick tons to reach a more sustainable system. We have to replace coal. That is actually not happening right now. It's going the other way around. And the reason is the price difference between gas and coal. The weak ETS system, but also I think the Ukrainian-Russian crisis will play a role in this. It also couples to Europe's ability to cooperate, to strengthen its role in relation to Russia. But we need more gas in a shorter run, to use more gas in the electricity system. We need to provide market shares for renewables. That has already happened to some extent. There has been an enormous progress during the last years. If we look into the situation today in countries like Germany, Italy, Spain, and so on, there is a lot of renewables, especially wind, but also some solar. And we also have seen that the volume has resulted in the prices going down. The costs for renewables are going down to levels that were not expected 5 to 10 years ago. There are needs in market and system design. I won't go into any details. It's quite complicated. Perhaps Tapio will say something about what you need in that respect. But I also think it's very important to see to that since this sort of transformation of electricity or of the energy system, the role of electricity in the energy system will have to go on over decades. It's also very important to see to that there is confidence that it can and will happen. And that I see as a very weak part of the transformation today. I will just give some glimpses into studies that the European Climate Foundation has been doing. 3 years ago, we looked into what is needed 2030, and this is today's situation. 2010, what sort of grid capacity, transmission grid capacity is there, and what sort of power mix is there. And you see then what needs to happen in the time perspective 2030. The transmission grid will have to be strengthened substantially. And you also see that the Nordic region will have to play a role in this. You see that part of the new capacity is Finland, Sweden, Finland, internally in Sweden, Norway. So the more renewables we will get in the system, the more important the hydro resources we have in the Nordic will be to balance the system. And here is some details on what sort of cost you can expect, capital expenditure and operational expenditure, and there is a major shift. But the important thing here is to underline that the cost for transmission capacity is quite low in reality. It's a minor part of the total cost. If you are interested to go more into detail, there are several studies that we and others have published on this. It's also so that we need to cooperate in Europe. This is just to demonstrate. You see the gray, the shaded parts is variations, and you see what sort of the green one shows what an integrated European system can do. It can even out variations enormously, and you below you see another curve with the same sort of message, that you can even out per hour and on a weekend day. This is just an example, but it's the same message. You see that if you strengthen the system, the cooperation between the systems, you see that you can even out a lot of variations. And that will grow more and more important with more renewables, both to see to that there is supply, but also see to that you can use the resources. Or if you don't have a strong system, the alternative is curtailment of renewables. I just wanted to say that according to the studies that the European Climate Foundation has been doing, and the same messages in the European Commission's studies, and I would say that others have come to the same conclusion. There is no major cost difference between different solutions. So it's not the case that a more sustainable system, more dependent on renewables, will be more expensive. The huge difference is in a shift from operational expenditure to capital expenditure. Now this is taken from the European Commission. They have been working with different scenarios. Here you see the total investments that you need for 2011 to 2050 in power, given different assumptions. And you see that with high renewables, you will have to invest a lot. But on the other hand, the total cost, seen from society's perspective, will be on the same level. The problem, I think, politically, is that people will compare the future with the history. They see what they have paid. But even if we keep the sort of solutions that we have today, the costs will be up substantially. And we have looked into, I'm trying here in 20 minutes to overview a very complex subject. This is another interesting thing that we have been trying to look into what sort of how will the economy react to a price spike in fossil fuels. You can say that is another way to measure some sort of supply crisis will have the same effect. Prices will be up. And you see the more renewables you have, the easier it will be to handle. You see the case with the high renewables, what sort of effect you will see of a price shock, and compared to the baseline, you see will have it's a substantial cost difference. So I think it's important to underline that renewable resources are local from a European perspective. You are dependent on technologies and so from other parts of the world, but you have the resources where you have them, you can control them to the extent that you can control the weather. No, but the sort of risks and variations will change. But a shift from fossil fuels to renewables will also mean a very different, and I would say in general, lower risk exposure. So you can say that a sustainable pathway then will mean that better security of supply situation, more sustainable, less emissions, and I would say also there will be, of course, economic impact. But as I say, the cost is not the major problem. I think the major problem is how the transformation happens. You can add costs or you can reduce costs for the transformation by having the right sort of policies and see to that you stabilize different sort of changes over time. I think that is the major problem, not the cost level as such. So just to mention some sort of factors then that create uncertainties during this long period. We see, first of all, that we have the European economic recovery. Today the problem is that the markets are depressed. Demand is not there. We are investing in diminishing markets. Electricity is down, gas is down substantially in some countries. And that mirrors the European depression. There are geopolitical risks. I won't go into any detail, you have mentioned it. There are uncertainties regarding how to source the gas, the role of shale gas. In general, I would say that shale gas won't solve the problem. It can make it better or worse, the situation better or worse. LNG is also, I think, an issue there, but it's with a depressed market. I think it's very hard to make the investments needed happen. Nuclear energy, I won't go into that at all because it's just destructive, but it's an issue that is of importance to what sort of role will nuclear play in the electricity system in the future. On average, in Europe, it's 25% of the system today. We have CCS, big expectations 10 years ago. We have to realize that even with an enormous amount of renewables, say that is 50% in the electricity system 2030, we still 50% will be thermal capacity. A part of that will be nuclear, but the rest will have to be gas and or coal, to some extent oil, but that is more a reserve fuel, I would say, in general. So the CCS issue is still there. How to handle the thermal capacity over the transformation period. And then, of course, we have a general question about the long-term economic prospects for Europe. But I think it's very easy to fall into some sort of depressed view. Europe will never come back, but I'm quite sure that will happen. And I think renewables can be a part of that. It can stimulate the economy. So, looking then into what sort of the energy policy landscape from a European perspective. To make it very simple, we can say that we have the European dimension, we have cost benefits from sharing resources. We have the national perspective, self-secure paradigm is still ruling, and we have to combine those two. But it's obviously so that if you just look into the electricity system, that a stronger European cooperation, a stronger European system can lower the costs substantially. And then there is, of course, a conflict between markets and policy interventions, or administered intervention. Decisions is a politer way of expressing the same thing. But I think it's important to realize that all those four forces will always have to be combined. It's not possible to choose just the European dimension or the member state dimension or whatever. It's a question of combinations. So if I try to sum up what I'm trying to say, I have done that in 5 different points. The infrastructure, the grid is important. The generation, we will see more and more of renewables, but still we will have thermal capacity. Gas will have to play an important role. It's not playing that role today, and the Russian crisis doesn't make it easier. We will have to look much more into demand side, more efficient use, but electricity is mainly a tool for more efficient use. It's not a threat to efficient use, but it's also so that we have to see more of demand side response in the system to be able to balance the system. We know that from a market perspective that the costs can be kept under control. I'm not saying that it will happen, but I'm saying there is no signal that it can't happen. We know that wholesale markets can cope with quite high volumes of renewables. For example, look into the situation in the Nordic system. It's hydro, of course, but still we are able to cope with the situation. And I would say that the fifth point is that we have to realize that there need to be a major shift from OPEX to CAPEX in electricity, but also in energy in general. So what I want you to remember is the grid is the glue. There is a complementarity between renewables and gas. Efficiency is important, will have to be even more important. The internal energy market and decarbonization agendas can be aligned. And there will have to be a shift from OPEX and CAPEX. How will that come about? Yeah. In the very end, it's all about human interactions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Yes, well, I had one question about the gas. I mean, the scientists say that we might need to decrease our use of fossil fuels by at least 80, maybe 90, or maybe 100% in 2050. Then there is no real place for fossil gas. Is there a possibility to invest also in biomass, gas from biomass? What do you think?
Yeah, it's research is going on. The problem is that it's quite expensive and you get quite big losses. There are even research and pilots in Germany where you turn electricity into gas and then turn it back into electricity when you need it. You can store it. Biogas, it's the same. It's not very competitive, and you have problem with the biomass as such, the basic supply of biomass. But I think that we will have to see that sort of solutions. But I also think that we, at least on a global scale, and to some extent perhaps in Europe, but globally, we need some sort of CCS solutions.
Thank you. One question from the floor. If there is one. Yes. Here in the middle. The microphone is coming. Yes.
Thomas Johansson, Lund University. You mentioned at the end a little about end-use efficiency. And it seems to me that that is really the key point you have been touching on. No one is interested in electricity as far as I know, but we're interested in the services we can obtain through the use of electricity. So the conversion efficiency from electricity to the end use, illumination for example, is critical. And as we know, we can do so much on just about any of those end use fronts. Why not focus more on that than on supplying more of something we don't really need or want?
No, I agree, and I think that the policy interventions will have to be much more demand-oriented. I think I see that as a problem, that the whole thinking is still in electricity, but also in energy in general, is supply-oriented. It is the producer's way of thinking that is still dominating. If you look into the electricity, for example, on the European level, I think that we need to have much more of independent planning of how to develop the system. Until now it has been start with production, then build out the grids. I think it needs to be the other way around. But that couples to what Christina said in the beginning, the institutional deficit we see today, that no one is really having that role. I guess that it's also so that if we pay for externalities, which we will have to do, that will also result in more efficient energy use.
Yes. Thank you very much. So, applause. Might be that the next speaker will give us a few more answers about that. We started in the geopolitical context, and now we've been looking at the European Union, and the next speaker will talk about what the current and the future developments in the energy sector will mean for Sweden and Finland. It's a national level, bilateral level, and also in the European perspective. And who would be better to talk about that than Tapio Kuula, who is the president and CEO of Fortum cooperation. Please.
Okay, thank you and good afternoon to everyone. It's really pleasure to be here as a Fortum representative. So I will start a bit from the history. As you can see from this slide, really energy has been elementary part from European Union from the very beginning. But one can clearly say that more should have been achieved in this area, and certainly much more should be done in European Union in the future. If we look at the situation, where is the arrow? Here. So if we look at the electricity market, it's good to remember that there are different value components in electricity. Everybody remembers energy. Normally we only speak about energy, kilowatt hours, gigawatt hours or terawatt hours. But of course also capacity is extremely important, so that there is enough capacity provided when there is need for capacity. And in that respect, of course, different types of production as well as the role of customer differs quite significantly. This gives opportunity both for producers and for customers to be active providing capacity. What is probably even more demanding is to keep the balance between supply and demand. And it's easy to see that there are significant differences, for example, between hydropower and wind power. Hydropower has very strong positive value because it can respond that the demand supply is under control. Wind power has very strong negative value in that respect because it's unpredictable and it can cause difficulties to keep the demand and supply balance. This gives also a bit opportunities for active customers. Then if we think about environmental consequences, which are value component as well, which is normally negative value component for different production types. Of course, CO2 really being the main burden and most acute issue because of the climate change. But it's easy to see that there are very big differences between different production types. Okay, this was a bit background information, but how to then develop really the electricity market in the way that it should be able to fulfill the European Union official targets to increase the competitiveness of European Union as a whole and different nations, to also give security of supply and especially to give also environmental sustainability, to reduce CO2 emissions, to also take otherwise care of environment. And of course, even to be able to provide customers those products and services which they need, but also what they wish to have. It's not only what we as companies in this sector think that they need, but it's also we have to appreciate what customers wish to have. And I would argue that the best way to achieve this is really to have market-based, predictable, harmonized, and as wide, comprehensive geographical market as possible. And to have market-based rules, I think that gives the confidence to different companies, to different investors, to customers, that this is market-based, this is fundamentally something which will develop in the right way also in the future. It should be technologically neutral. we shouldn't pay as much attention to different technologies as we do today. If those different technologies fulfill all those criteria, energy, capacity, demand and supply balance, and environmental criteria, I think that they should be accepted. Some of them are stronger in other areas, some are in other areas, but they should be kept all criteria in mind. And then what Arne already underlined well is really that we should have enough physical transmission capacity, but we should also have very strong cooperation between system operators and power exchanges European-wide. Actually, we should have these actors to act as one entity. When we reach that, I think that gives really good platform. And I would argue that if we can reach this is much more than any individual technology or any individual political decision. But this requires very strong commitment from different key political decision makers, and that requires that there will be enough decision power in Brussels instead of in national parliaments. Because if we look at really this picture, this is a good example what has happened when there has been a lot of national decisions, different national decisions which are not at all in line with each other. There is a lot of feed-in tariffs, a lot of subsidies, and this has led to the situation which is very expensive to customers. This is environmentally very bad. This is very expensive to taxpayers as well. So you can see that wholesale electricity prices, they are very low. That prevents investments, but the customers are paying very high prices. And as Arne already said, we all see environmental consequences, a lot of CO2 emissions. If we would have different kind of market, different kind of fundamentally right kind of criteria, predictability, I think that the situation could be much better than this. And we can't do anything else than to improve the existing situation significantly. And we can do that if there is strong enough commitment for that. And in that respect, I think that it's nice to be here today, because Nordic countries, whether it's question about political decision makers, whether it's question about Nordic companies, industrial associations in Nordic areas, I think that we can influence significantly also European-wide decision making. We should have even closer cooperation than we do together, today. We should have this kind of European-wide view, and we can play as an coordinator. We can play as an example in that respect. We have all the fundaments in place, and if we act together and use really our strength, I think that we can make things to happen. It's not easy, but we have to work together and have very strong commitment. We have good opportunity to really show the way to be CO2 free or CO2 neutral geographical area. I think that this is good challenge. This gives us also good business opportunities. What is then Fortum as a company doing in this respect? We clearly have the mission to be energy company for the future that improves life for present and future generation. And when we say something, we really mean that. We have developed sustainable solutions for especially energy production, both for power and for heat. And of course, we are a listed company. We are also delivering good value for our share owners. And to have and combine the commercial mindset and the environmental issues, I think that that is the best way to really make things to happen. And that is the reason why there has to be right kind of basic fundamentals for the market as well. We have different business areas where we have special strengths, and that is obviously nuclear power, nuclear power, which is a bit controversial issue, I admit that, but it's CO2 free. And that is certainly an advantage. It can normally also participate the peak power, but it has no flexibility with the demand and supply demand. So in that sense, there are positive elements, but it's not that competitive in all respects. And of course, also the investment costs are today quite high. Hydropower is in many respects really ideal, and when that is done properly, taken into account environmental consequences, it's really competitive and environmentally friendly as well. Energy efficient combined heat and power production, and especially when that is based on biofuels, where we have a lot of potential in Nordic countries. I think that is very competitive, and that also improves energy efficiency. If there is one single technology which can improve the energy efficiency most, that is actually CHP, especially in the northern Europe. And of course then to develop the energy market, as I said, that also there is a stronger interactivity between the producers and consumers, and gives also opportunity for consumers for different product services and wishes. Geographically, we have clearly different areas. Of course, Nordic countries, including the Baltic Rim area, Poland, Baltic countries, that is really core of our home market, and in that respect, of course, Sweden and Finland really being core of the core. In Russia, we have been significant player in Russia since February 2008, when we bought so-called territorial generation company 10 in Urals and Western Siberia. And at that time, we committed to build 8 new power plants. Today we have sent press release that we have completed the 6th one, so that there is still 2 under construction. And that gives us solid earnings growth in Russia. And we can say that the Ukrainian crisis hasn't had any direct consequences to Fortum. We produce electricity and heat for Russian market. And in our geographical area in Russia, actually Russia produces about 80% of natural gas and about 60% of oil, so that we also play significant role for key industry in Russia. And I think that gives us also good security that we will get the fuel, etc. But obviously there has been indirect consequences like ruble exchange rate, and also lower prospects for economic growth in Russia. But Russia is very and will be very important for Fortum. And despite this crisis, we really try to continue our business in Russia as much business as usual as possible. Then to build platform for the future growth. And here I can give one example. We have said that solar business is technologically very attractive in that respect, that we see that there is a lot of technological development potential. We have presence in India, and the reason why we are Indian, and especially in solar business, is that we see that there is a lot of growth prospects in India. Solar business is interesting, and of course, especially in India, there is a lot of sunshine, and it's good to remember that a significant part of growth comes from cooling, and in that sense that fits also time-wise well to solar business, because when there is sunshine there is also solar power capacity, and the need for cooling purposes time-wise fits extremely well. So I tried to leave some time for questions, so that please feel free, whether it's question about my presentation, about Russia or whatsoever.
Thank you very much. Yes, the first question then about Russia from me. Russia seems to need some help in developing a sustainable energy system from an environmental point of view. Do you think that your presence in Russia can help with that in the long run?
I think that our presence in Russia certainly helps that, in that sense that we produce a lot of CHP, and of course we use about 95% of our fuel in Russia is natural gas, and when we use that in the area where they produce natural gas, even if that is fossil fuel, I think that it's still best fossil fuel, and is quite clear that it is used especially in that geographical area.
Yes, and now questions from the floor. We have one question here.
Hi, Jonas Almqvist, Sustainable Energy Investment. I have one question for you. You were discussing the low wholesale prices on electricity. And how do you suggest to solve this fundamental issue when you have too low wholesale prices, which stop basically investment in new energy production? How do you solve it? Is it to try to force up the price, or wait until the production means get cheaper, or the subsidies that you didn't like that much?
Yes, I think that the best way to correct the market, if I say so, would really to have the market based on those criteria which I said. Of course, that will take some time. One very concrete issue, of course, today is the very low CO2 price. Of course, I feel I'm probably a bit wrong person to say that, but I think that today's CO2 price is absolutely too low. That doesn't give the right kind of signal, and certainly that is in conflict our intention to mitigate the climate change.
Thank you. That's great that you got him to say that, I think. What we will try to do now is that we want to find out what are the similarities and the differences between the national policies when it comes to energy issues in Finland and in Sweden. And for that cause we have invited two speakers, and those two speakers are both Director Generals of the Finnish and Swedish energy authorities. So we will start to learn about the Finnish energy and climate policy framework and how, from the Finnish perspective, we see the way forward. So we will begin by listening to Riku Huttunen, who is the Director General of the Finnish Energy Authority. Please.
So good afternoon, everybody, and to start with the discussion today in Europe, it reminds me of something, and that something is what happened during the last Finnish EU presidency in Lahti. Mr. Putin was invited to meet European leaders in the EU summit. It was after the first Ukrainian gas crisis, after the Ukrainians not paying their bills, and the EU tried very hard to speak with one voice. That's happening today as well. But the difference, of course, is the big tragedy of war in Ukraine. Okay, but my subject today is the Finnish energy and climate policy. To start with, I'm not representing the Finnish government here. I'm representing an independent national regulatory authority, which is responsible for electricity and gas markets, as well as the promotion of energy efficiency and renewables. We are also the emissions trading Authority in Finland. Where are we today? Trying to be objective, I refer to the report by the International Energy Authority last year describing the Finnish energy policy. What's good in Finland is the well-diversified energy mix, the ambitious renewable program. We have a target of 38% of renewables by 2020. One of the lowest shares of fossil fuels in comparison to other OECD countries. A liberalized electricity market. That's something we have in common with Sweden, of course. And also the research and development funding. It's one of the highest, or actually the highest in the OECD. And this shows our energy mix. The share of renewables is high. The share of nuclear energy in comparison to the average of OECD countries as well. And peat, something very specific to us, and we use peat especially for one reason. It's an indigenous energy source and important for our CHP production. Looking at electricity, there we have a nice spectrum of colors, of course, quite balanced at the moment. What's to be noted is that we have a high share of imports of electricity at the moment, or for a long time actually, and a very low share of wind power. One can't talk about a national energy policy here in the EU without talking about the common European energy policy. And just to remind you briefly on where are we at the moment. We have those 2020 goals. Emissions, renewables, energy efficiency. We have a goal to integrate the European electricity and gas markets. Our leaders, the European Council, has said by 2014. Time is running. And as well, we should end the isolation of national markets by 2015. That's even a more difficult task to fulfill. And just to give you a very close example is that we are, or our companies are aiming at connecting Finland to continental Europe, or at least the Baltics and other global markets. And we have those pipeline projects, Baltic Connector, and as well the LNG terminal projects. And as has been said today, almost 100% of gas is imported from Russia. This is the thing we have in common in Nordic countries. We have the common Nordic-Baltic electricity wholesale market. Now we can say Baltic because Estonia has been so well connected to Finland. But there's a clear rationale for doing this. We have very different kinds of production capacities in Nordic countries, starting from Norway, which producing almost 100% of electricity by hydropower, to Denmark, which is dependent on the coal and wind, and Sweden and Finland, producing, for example, a lot of nuclear electricity. Thinking about today's theme is worth noticing that for a long time we have been in Finland importing electricity from Russia with the whole capacity we have, about 1,300 megawatts. But at the moment, due to Russian capacity mechanisms, which are basically a way to subsidize base production of electricity, so our imports have decreased to about 1/3 of the full capacity. And at the same time, we have been opening or are aiming at opening the possibility to also export power to Russia. And in Nordic Baltic markets, the situation today is that a huge amount of electricity is imported from Sweden to Finland, and a remarkable share of that is flowing through Finland to Estonia. And that's basically due to price differences we have in the markets. And due to that high volume of trade, we have different prices normally nowadays between Finland and Sweden also. Basically, we have bottlenecks between our countries at the moment. Returning to Europe, there's something we can say is a sign of real European markets. And this sign is that the day ahead trade harmonization, it has been taking place in Northwest Europe, from Nordic countries to Iberian Peninsula. But the fact is that we still have, of course, those physical limitations to trade, and the prices are not at all harmonized at the moment. What will be the next big step, of course, except the physical connections, is to make the southeastern Europe connected to this system. So, what's our direction in the future? The issue is very topical in Europe at the moment. The Commission published its communication in January, stating that thinking about 2030, we should have one primary goal, and that goal is to decrease emissions by 40%. What hasn't been discussed so much is what are the shares between emissions trading system and non-emissions trading system. The first one is easier for national governments because it's an EU system. It will happen once decided. The emissions will be cut. The price of emission allowances will take care of that. But what's more difficult is how we manage to fulfill the national targets. According to the Commission, renewables target would be basically in line with the emissions target. The emissions target would be the primary one. On energy efficiency, the discussions are going on. Are we going to have a 30% target for 2030? And we will have a new college, new commissioners. Bratušek and Cañete are new commissioners most likely. What are they thinking about the situation? Or I'm not actually quite sure about Cañete, but at least they are the candidates at the moment. The European leaders will take a stance during October. What are the aims? What are the main goals? And At the moment, they discuss about energy union. If you read the June conclusions, they talk about energy union, which to me is starting to sound the same thing as European energy and climate policy. It's not the same thing as Donald Tusk was saying about buying gas together from Russia. It's not anymore as limited a thing. And of course, we have this triangle, which has been shown many times today already: sustainability, security of supply, competitiveness. What's the balance? In the long term, we should go very clearly towards sustainability, but in the shorter run, what will be done? It's a question of competitiveness, a question of security of supply. And what I find very important, we should make better regulation in Europe as well. Less red tape. And now I'm referring to the Finnish energy and climate strategy. I'm sorry if everybody can't understand. It's in Swedish now because it was easier to find. But the idea is to decrease emissions, better energy efficiency. What's very important for us is to have more biofuels, more production and use of biofuels, wind power, demand side response ability, flexibility, and we should be as market oriented as possible. Well, we should look at both production and demand side. If one looks at production, so if no new investments would take place, this would be the picture. Of course, some investments are going to take place, but this is just to show that we need some further investments, and so needs the whole of Europe, so needs the whole of the world in the energy sector. And now is the hot potato here. We have, in Finland, our government has just made 2 big decisions concerning further construction of nuclear power. They are called nuclear decisions in principle under the Nuclear Energy Act. Basically, those decisions were made already in 2010, but after circumstances have become different, so they had to be taken once again to the table, discussed, and a new decision on them. And what happened? Fennovoima project was accepted once again, and the Greens left the coalition after that decision. And what had changed was that there is the idea to have a Russian nuclear power plant now, Rosatom power plant, and a Russian ownership of 1/3 of the project. I'm sorry if I'm too slow here. And there's a need to ratify the decision by the parliament, and then the other decision was negative. It was on Olkiluoto 4 unit. And what's important here is the need for further electricity in the future. And trying to be brief, we need base production. We will have intermittent production and some reserve capacity. But my point is, we need flexibility, both in production and on the demand side. And there we will be helped by smart grids and so on. And if you remember one thing is, please trust the markets. The subsidies in Europe have been too big. They should be more focused on innovative production, and the regulation has been too much. We need less and better regulation. And I'll stop here. Here you find some comments.
Yes, and you will be able to come back also during the panel discussion later on. So I think the questions will have to wait until then. There are lots of things that are very interesting in this. I'll just ask you one question. I know that in Finland there is a kind of political consensus saying that you should be self-sustainable on energy in the future sometime. And at the same time, we are talking about the Nordic market, we're talking about the European market. Is it still an issue, like in 10 and 20 years ahead, that every country in itself should be sustainable, self-sustainable on energy? Or can it be that Sweden have an overcapacity and Finland can import from Sweden all the time? Or what do you think about that?
Yes, the government has a strategy, our national strategy says that we should be self-sustainable in every situation, even during wintertime peak load situation.
It's not very economically efficient, cost efficient, if everyone should be self-sustainable every day in the winter.
If I would guess, which I shouldn't do, that, but if I could guess, we will have some retuning of that part of our strategy when discussed next time.
Okay, thank you very much so far.
Thank you.
So now we leave the floor to Erik Brandsma, who is the Director General of the Swedish Energy Agency, who will tell us about the Swedish policies. Please.
So, tack Maria. Thank you. Colleagues, friends, it's a pleasure to be here at this seminar. And I must say that one of the main reasons I decided to say yes to the invitation was that I think we have, and then I pick up on something that Tapio said, I think we have some major areas for improvement in our relationship. It's related to this issue also that Maria took up. Does energy security also mean national energy security? And to me, and I'll get back to that at the end of what I'm talking about, it's not the same thing. But it's a great pleasure to be here. I have, unfortunately, a lot of contact with my other Nordic colleagues, but very little with my Finnish colleagues. I met Tapio for the first time at the Almedalen meeting this summer. It was a great pleasure. I've met most of the other Threes regularly. I meet my colleagues, Denmark, Sweden, etc. I think it's a sign, somewhere a signal that here's some area that we could work on. I must also say that Tapio is the only person that I have made the next appointment with in 10 years' time. Tapio, remember why? He's not, he had left, okay, you know. We're going to evaluate whether it was a good decision to sell the grids and buy CHP in Russia. Good. My name is Erik Brandsma. I've been the Director General at the Energy Agency for the past 2 years. I won't use PowerPoints. It makes it more flexible. I adapt to what already has been said. I don't need to go over the European situation. And maybe you had enough of PowerPoints already. I don't know. I'll start here. I'll talk about energy policy for Sweden, but start off with the European context. My agency is responsible for the whole energy map, except what's done with market inspection through the Energy Inspectorate and the grids, which is managed by my colleague Mikael Odenberg from Svenska Kraftnät. But we do a lot of research and development and innovation. We work a lot with new startup businesses. We do the CDM climate work and the registry of the accounts. We work also a lot on analysis, policy analysis, instrument analysis, and the whole energy efficiency challenge. So it's quite a broad area, but it also gives me the possibility to then put my nose into a lot of other people's business. If we start off with the European context, I worked in a major European energy company a number of years ago, and at that time, in the middle of, say, 2005, 2006, if you would have sit down and say, what is the worst that could happen to our industry? You wouldn't have been able to imagine what has happened. I think that is just simply the case. This was an industry with good margins, didn't need to defend itself that much. It had a bad brand value and a low trust in society. But hey, we can deal with that. We make a lot of money. What happened? We had, of course, the financial crisis, but we had also a building up scenario in something that I could even call a perfect storm, where a lot of elements add up and create a perfect storm. This perfect storm then also includes increasing investments, but lower prices. At the same time, also fuel prices that went down. We saw then an effect of that in the destruction of share value, basically, of all the major European companies. Some of them a third, some of them half of their share value. Companies were locked into long-term gas contracts with falling prices. They were even oil index linked. The capacity to invest decreased very rapidly. People were looking for cost-cutting programs and new markets, and none of these two has really delivered alternatives. We got a first gas crisis, Ukraine, Russia, you all know about that. We've got Fukushima, we've got the Energiewende, the shale gas from the US. We even got some examples of what a blackout could turn into, even at the European level. An industry in this disruption, basically, and an industry that is scrambling to find its new objectives, its new business idea, and also its capacity to survive at the same time. There's a call on them to increase investments in renewables, etc., etc. At the same time, if you talk about European policy, we saw a number of years ago that we all talked about an integrated European policy, energy policy, that would help us forward. Secure competitiveness, at the same time reaching our climate targets and work towards a more sustainable energy system. This then turned into a discussion about energy security more and more. And more countries started to develop their own national policies. And what we have now in Europe is a patchwork of regulation, of support systems, of capacity markets. And I'm afraid that that we'll see a period of increased regulation, just to be able to deal with the enormous problems of not having coordinated at a European level and all wanting to have a national system that helps us secure energy access. We see a top in the total amount of support that we can give to renewables. All countries are re-evaluating how much they can go, how far they can go. We've seen tumbling happening in countries like Spain, etc. We even see a clear signal from the European Union due to the Ålands Vindkraft case that we'll continue with national support systems because currently that seems to be the only way forward. There's very little impetus for an international European approach to deal with this. And this is unfortunate, I think, because if we at the same time talk about competitiveness and positioning European industry in the global marketplace, then we need this more optimal thinking of an integrated energy policy. The Ukraine crisis is, of course, something that is very regrettable and causes a lot of distress, but it's at the same time a call for a number of politicians in Europe to think, wait a minute, is it really clever to do this all by ourselves? Why not look at each other and try to develop a European solution. For the first time I've seen, and I think it will go through if I follow the discussion with the European Commission, we may have a target for interconnectedness. Not just only the targets for climate, for energy efficiency, and for renewables, but also one for interconnectedness. And this is because of the being more flexible within the European context, helping each other with managing capacity and effect. The target is there 15%. I think European average is about 8% interconnectivity. Some countries are very low, like Portugal, Spain, 2%, somewhere there. In Sweden we have 27%, so this is a target that we'd be able to reach by 2030, sorry, 15%. Which is an interesting development. It's a whole different dimension into the dialogue on energy in the European context. And it's not difficult to think that this is suboptimal, or not. There must be better ways of being more cost effective using the means that we have to develop solutions that in particular say industry and European citizens may benefit of. I think we have a clear example that where one has, as the UK did in the 80s, when Thatcher said our energy strategy is not to have an energy strategy, they have major problems. They have an old fleet of power plants that need to be replaced and they have no alternatives. No wonder they end up with trying to build 2 nuclear power plants at an enormous cost. So we need to think ahead and manage this accordingly. If I then look at Sweden, we have a very good situation at the moment. We have good nuclear power, we have got hydropower, around 40% each, depending on sort of weather and conditions and revisions, and an increasing part bioenergy and renewable energy. Looks very well, and everybody's pleased as it is. There's always some muttering here and there, but it works as it is. We've got competitive prices, and that's it. But if we look ahead, then we need to ask ourselves a number of questions with regard to these. And I'm focusing on the electricity production at the moment. The hydropower. Hydropower has operated in Sweden since many years back, but basically without approval from the government in terms of environmental values. This has never been an environmental impact assessments of the hydro plants that we have. So there's a lot of tidal pressure to change that, and we need to live up to the European Directive for quality, environmental quality also in this regard, and also the environmental targets that we've set for ourselves in Sweden. And I personally think that one doesn't exclude the other, and we will be able to find some solutions. But if we go to some of the extreme scenarios, then hydropower may be under pressure. And I'm really urging everybody that works on these types of issues to look very carefully at keeping at least keeping our hydropower level up. Since it's going to be an essential part of the future energy system for Sweden. If we look at nuclear, and we look at the solution that our neighbors have, we have a situation where we have a rather old fleet of 10 reactors that will sort of reach its end of life by sort of after 2020, say 2025 to 2045. Depending on the requirements that are my colleagues from the Strålskyddsmyndigheten, that must be something like Radiation Protection Agency, what they will set as quality levels, we'll have to see how quickly some of the reactors need to be shut down, either by government or by the owners themselves. And I think actually that this problem will solve themselves, because the owners will see that investments in some of the oldest reactors like O1, R1 is not worth the investment to keep them open for a number of years still. The costs are plainly too high. Renewables, we're doing very well. And here I get into the targets for Sweden. We've set a number of targets for 2020. On Wednesday, we're going to present the control station report that we've developed, and there you will get the exact figures, but I'll give you a little bit of a preview. We'll be able to achieve our target for renewables of 50% in 2020. No problem, we'll be even a bit higher than that. We'll also be able to achieve the 10% bio. Sorry, sometimes this disappears. I hope it's okay for you. The 10% bio part or renewable part in transport. That will be also possible, mainly due to the addition of biofuels to the regular fuels. We'll be having difficulties. It will be a challenge to achieve the energy efficiency target of 20% with the reference year of 2008. There's a bit of a challenge, but it's also difficult to estimate there because it depends on fuel prices and global growth, or not global growth, Swedish growth. And the 40% CO2 reduction target is within reach. Depending a bit on the international possibilities to offset. Yes, and with that we get a picture of an interesting discussion that will particularly be interesting after 2020, because that's where some key decisions need to be made. But at the same time, I would urge that we can't wait for that to happen. We have to start this discussion right now. And one of the key things I sort of experience when I'm discussing energy issues in Sweden is that we're discussing a lot of these issues in isolation from each other. And it becomes a single issue discussion about a certain type of power production. A yes, no to nuclear, a yes, no to water. And on top of that, there's a certain group that talks about the transport issue, another group that talks about smart grids, and another group that talks about energy efficiency. Here, I think, more than anywhere else, here is a key, sort of a prime example of where the sum is more than the whole, that the whole is more than the sum of the parts. We need to look at energy production as a whole. We need to look at storage possibilities, we need to look at distribution capacity, and we need to look at energy efficiency. And I think that was one of the questions that come also up. We should not underestimate the possibilities that energy efficiency can deliver. And all of this in an international perspective, because I'm convinced that looking at it purely from a Swedish perspective will be very costly for society and will not deliver the targets that we have set for ourselves. We need to look at this from an international perspective, and we need to engage with our neighbors on finding optimal solutions. We all have strengths and weaknesses in our systems, and we can engage to offset those with each other. That goes towards the neighbors in the south, towards Denmark, Germany, the Baltic states, towards the west, with Norway, which its strength in hydropower, but also, I hope, towards the east, where we can work together much more, I think, on this bio-based economy together. That's where we have common strength, and where we can also talk about putting this puzzle together of how much nuclear do we need, not only in Finland, but in the whole region. And how can we find financing solutions that provides also national security? This will be a very interesting discussion, and I would look forward to engage in that. I know that Finland has a different history. We were interviewed, my colleague and me, before. I know that you're closer to Russia, but we're closer to Europe. This together creates a very good synergy, I think, for solutions in the future. So I would plead for a regional solution, since we can't wait for the European Union to actually deliver an integrated energy policy. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we will soon continue with a panel discussion. I think we'll take this. Take it over here. Yes. I was thinking about one thing, that now we are evaluating these targets that Sweden have set up, like the target for renewables, for example, which is 50% by 2020. How much do we have today?
Over already.
Yeah.
On Wednesday you get the exact figure.
Yeah. And we have had that for a few years, actually. So doesn't that mean that the EU policy is actually not ambitious enough? It's not that we've been really tormenting ourselves with reaching these targets. It's not that it's been really, really expensive for everyone and that everyone is very dissatisfied with the way the energy policy has been made, and we still reach the targets. And I mean, it's 2014, we've got 6 years to go.
An interesting, there's two parts in your question. That I would say maybe the European policy is ambitious enough. Maybe we had extremely good negotiators from the Swedish side, which had certain instructions that one could pose this question to. The other part is that we are doing it very cheaply compared to a lot of the other countries. With our certificate system, which is so sort of market-based and technology neutral, we're actually delivering renewable energy for a very competitive price, if one can say so.
If you look ahead, if you see into the future, do you see Sweden as a country that is a net exporter of electricity?
That's an interesting question. I think we could, but if that should be a target in itself is the question. I think we need a dynamic system that would allow us to be a net exporter in certain years, but also to be importing at other periods of time. Otherwise, it's not suboptimal. We need to draw on the benefit, on the positives from other countries around us also. So in itself, to have as a sort of as a target for the future to be a net exporter, that may be something, but I can't really see that discussion as being the priority discussion at the moment.
Because if you're going to have an integrated market, I guess some countries must be net exporters and some others net importers.
It needs to be a balance.
Yes,
exactly.
But still, does anyone have a question before we continue to the panel discussion? So you can raise your hand and we'll find a microphone for you. If you have a question to Erik. Yes, we have a question. You need a microphone because we are recording this for the internet.
You can speak up loud, or is that? I can repeat your question.
We'll get the microphone.
This is alive. Yes, I would like to ask Finnish General Director, what are the future proof, as example, on 10 years or a little bit later even? Hello? Yes. What kind of sureness is that Russia will deliver uranium to Finnish nuclear plants? Because we know how the situations can change rather quickly. It's almost like a storm.
Well, we'll get over to that question in just a short moment, because we will invite all the panel participants to the stage. So if you, Erik, if you move over here, your name is on this middle table. And then we also welcome back Mr. Rico Huttunen and Arne Mogren. So you can also take your places. And then we have two new participants, which is Anja Silvenoinen, who is the Vice President of Pöyry Management Consulting, and Tarja Kronberg, who is a former member of the European Parliament for the Green Party. So now we will hear some new comments on this. So I will actually give the word first to you, Anja and Tarja, so that you can comment on what you've been hearing here today. So who wants to start? Anja, for example.
Okay,
yes.
I can start. Thank you. I mean, it has been a very good presentations, very interesting presentations, but a couple of remarks is that almost all the presentations have been kind of calling either this kind of one gas deal against Russia, or the stronger EU policy, or more decision-making power to the EU. And of course, in that respect, my question is: do we really think so? So because then the underlining kind of sound of has been that it's not so convenient. I didn't get the feeling that all the speakers are so convinced that giving more power to the EU is the thing that we really want. So that is one thing that I would like to challenge the speakers, or maybe the audience as well, is that really the way we want to go. Market mechanism was another issue which many of the speakers were calling after, and integrated electricity market, integrated gas market, more connections between the market. One thing which was only in the one presentation which enables, in addition to integrated market, to get the CO2 reductions or the better response, was the demand side management or demand side issue, which Riku Huttunen actually mentioned, and it has been investigated quite a lot that if we had a real demand side management also in place in the integrated market, it would reduce remarkably the cost of reducing CO2. Then the two energy authorities, they were speaking about the energy union or regional versus EU, and actually I think that the other speakers were also asking more Nordic cooperation, which I would like to underline as well. So those were the issues which I heard from the presentations.
So, I mean, since you are part of the demand side when it comes to electricity, representing energy-intensive industries, and also kind of industry that is well represented in both Sweden and Finland, so how do you see your possibility to participate in reducing the demand of electricity, and also maybe in some ways you could also be a part of energy production? I don't know. What is the possibility for that for your industry?
Yeah, there is a lot of potential in the industry and possibilities in the industry to really participate the hourly market or the balancing market or on this demand side. Naturally, it would once again require some sort of incentive. So what is the benefit? Of course, when the electricity price is high, it definitely happens among the industry already today. So electricity is such a big cost element. But then the question is, should we extend that to even a smaller consumers, like grouping the houses together and having this kind of prosumer, like what Tapio Kuula was bringing the term into the discussion.
Yeah, so is your analysis that an integrated energy market will reduce electricity prices, or will it raise the electricity prices in the Nordic countries? Have you made any kind of analysis concerning that? Because there are lots of different opinions on that.
Well, there is. I think it is as emotional issue almost as nuclear power, but the Nordic electricity market. I think that if the electricity market were working without the disruptions, and then the policies would be same all over the places. There are enough interconnections. I think that the electricity prices in the Nordic countries, or let's put it that way, the electricity cost on the Nordic countries will be at reduce a little bit, but it really would require that the markets are working kind of perfectly. It doesn't mean that the volatility will disappear. The markets will be more and more volatile, but if you take an average, it will help a lot.
Okay, Tarja Kronberg, what is your reflection after listening to this afternoon?
Yes, Just a few comments. First of all, I think it is a very good idea to have Swedish-Finnish cooperation on energy security. We already have it on national security and it has been increasing, so this is a very good initiative which I hope will come up with concrete proposals. I have a few comments on the innovative aspects, but just I followed the European discussion on energy security in the spring alongside with the Ukrainian crisis, and just a few comments. First on energy security, the two solutions that have been proposed in the European Union, external from the European Union, is Canada. Everybody is asking the question, is Canada the new Russia? And Canada, of course, is producing now energy from oil sands, which the European Union is very critical of. Canada has the uranium supplies that Europe might need for its nuclear industry. And thirdly, Canada is already exporting forest energy to Britain, especially in the form of pellets. And we now have a free trade agreement with Canada, which will be approved here in the fall. So I think Canada may be some of the answers instead of self-sufficiency. The second question is Iran. I have been following the debate on Iran as a chair of the Iran delegation from the European Parliament, and many people are now, industries, countries are now looking to Iran. Maybe the nuclear issue will be solved in November, maybe sanctions will be released, and I think Slovenia at least is working closely already with Iran in trying to import gas and oil. So there are these kind of external solutions to the energy security question as a follow-up of the Ukrainian crisis. The second is, of course, the question of self-sufficiency. What can be done on the European level to improve energy supply? And I think there's a question, obvious question of the German shale gas. This is also, many environmentalists are very critical of this. There's a question of increased nuclear power. We have heard it's very expensive in investment and maybe not so profitable. And there's, of course, the alternative of renewable energies. And as we heard, there's this 27% target for 2030, which still is, I think, a recommendation and not the binding target. So what can Sweden and Finland do together? I think there are three things. One is the question of there's a real risk due to the energy security that environmental standards will be reduced. Oil sands, shale gas, other things because of the question of do we have the supply. And I think Sweden and Finland have a political task of taking care that these standards are not reduced. The second thing is the question of Canada and forest energy. I think Sweden and Finland should work together innovatively on forest energy. And here I don't mean only in production of pellets or marketing them, but rather on the question of technology. There's a lot of transportation technology, there's a lot of technology in the forest, there's a lot of technology in production. And I think here Sweden is in front, Finland is lagging after because we lost the pellet market, but I think there's still possibilities for cooperation. And the third point is maybe administrative innovation. Now, the question of renewable energies and bioenergy will be solved within the European Union, within the bioeconomy strategy. And the problem with the bioeconomy strategy is that it needs administrative bridges among different sectors, waste, food, forest, and transportation and others. And I think there's really a need for innovative approaches to administration of this bioeconomy. And maybe here, Sweden and Finland could work together.
Yes, thank you. That was a good also introduction to the next step, which is that I want all of you to answer the question of how could Finland and Sweden cooperate? Is it a good idea to cooperate at all, or should we just be in the EU and talk to the other countries and not to each other? And also the fact that it sounded a bit like this, the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, are talking a lot, but Finland is on the side talking to Russia. Is that true? Or what is the situation today, and how do you think it should be in the future? The Nordic countries, if you look at it from outside, I think you would say that the Nordic countries has a very, very good opportunity to decarbonize the energy system. Much better opportunity than many other countries in the European Union. Could we be an example for the others? And I give the word first to you, Arne, because it was a while since you spoke.
Yes. I think, first of all, I want just to remind you that in electricity, there has been a long tradition of cooperation between the Nordic countries, and I think it has been really successful. Today, it's unclear to me what is happening, since it was, in a way, lost in the European process. But I think to find a way to have a stronger Nordic dialogue and a broader dialogue, because the nodal system was built on a dialogue between the monopolists in the old days. But to have a broader dialogue, exchange ideas, find ways to build common solutions, I think is a starter. And from what I can see, to some extent, it has been lost. When I started at Vattenfall in the end of the 80s, Nodal still existed and was run by, in principle, Vattenfall. And there were meetings twice a year, and all the leaders met and discussed the situation, what to do, how can we cooperate, how can we solve things. I'm not saying that we should go back to that sort of dialogue. It must be a much broader dialogue, but a dialogue, I think, is a base. And I think it's also important to make the Nordic perspective much more visible in Europe. From my experience after being there for periods is that they don't see the Nordic region as important. And you never see anyone from the Nordic countries in the European context. That is a little bit depressing, but I think it's partly true. And I think a dialogue is a base for that. I think if we could find a way of the Nordics taking some sort of regional leadership and develop cooperation with Germany, Poland, UK, and so on. Because there is, I think it's quite hard to find common solution just on the European level of 28 states, but there is in the northwest region or in the northern region, there is a lack of leadership, and I think the Nordic countries, if they cooperate, can take on that role. I also think that there are much more to do when it comes to grid cooperation, strengthening the grid. We just discussed, or you discussed, energy security from what does that mean? What can you export, import from other countries, and so on? Denmark is a really interesting example. They can, in principle, stop producing. They can supply Denmark if they want to. They can stop producing import from their neighbors, and they are still planning to build more grid capacity. So you have to make a difference, but the reason why you trade is that it lowers the cost. It's not that you cannot supply yourself. That's the main reason. So you can still have the capacity you need if you want to as reserves, and do a lot of trading. And I think there is more to do in the Nordic region, but there is a need for some sort of political backup that is, or political interest that is lacking. I listened to the election campaign here in Sweden. I didn't hear anything about Europe in the campaign and nothing about the Nordic cooperation. So it was about Sweden, how Sweden will solve things, what sort of challenges we have. The big challenges we are facing are not Swedish. They are global and European. And then I think to think over, can we do more together when it comes to innovation? And I think earlier on we discussed more efficient energy use, and I think a role to take on is to be more demand-oriented, to look into what can you really do, what sort of appliances or solutions can be there in the future, and demand that from producers.
When we look at the Nordic countries, you can see one thing that we also have in common, and it is that we use very much electricity per capita.
Yeah, we are already there.
Yeah. I mean, you can say that it's because it's cold and we got all these energy-intensive industries, but it's not only that, because even if you took all the industry away in Sweden and you didn't heat anything with electricity, we would still use more electricity per capita than the average in the European Union. Yeah, so it's really, it seems to me, just looking from the outside, that there must be some kind of possibility to reduce the use of electricity in our countries.
Yeah, but it's also one reason, I think, that we did a study some years ago looking into comparing the different European economies. And then if you look into Sweden, and we looked into some countries, Sweden, Denmark, you see they are in many ways much more efficient than other economies. From a climate perspective, from an energy perspective. And if I look into Sweden, I think that one of the reasons is that we have already done the second wave of electrification, as I tried to describe.
Might be. Yeah. So, Riku, what do you think about cooperation in the future? Electricity, we have some cooperation, but there are other areas?
We have basically a huge amount of cooperation, but it's done under the European umbrella nowadays. I meet my Swedish colleague as the National Regulatory Authority every month. What it happens in Brussels or in Ljubljana, and that's the point. We should show some leadership. We are a prime example of liberalized electricity markets, for example. Let's show that to everybody and try to sell it to others as well. It's not easy at all. We are working on the codes which should imply the European legislation and so on. It's not easy. We could show our leadership in clean tech, in biofuels, wood-based products, so on. There we are really in the lead, and we should show Europe the way. But we also have some defensive interests. And just to take an example, I didn't have the time to tell you before, but energy efficiency requirements for different kinds of devices, they are a very important way to increase energy efficiency. And if you come from the Central or Southern European country, you don't understand the situation here. The heat pumps, they need to function also when the temperature is below -20. Or you should have enough capacity in your boiler, in your house, just not to freeze. and this kind of common interest, of course, we have. And also in the climate issues in many ways. And I'm not going to in details, but the question is about the emission stories and so on.
Yes. And a comment from you also, Erik. What do you think? Yeah, we have a common future.
A lot of things have been said. A few reactions on that. I think, and I don't really agree with Arne on that, I think that we have, under the radar screen, maybe a lot of influence, disproportionate for the little country like Sweden in the European discussions, even if that doesn't show up on the front pages. And that is in particular in terms of the products and standardization processes. I think also that there's a lot of cooperation on regulation, as we heard here. We have a lack of coordination, I think, in terms of do we have a common vision of how the energy system will look like in the Nordic region, say 10, 20, 30 years from now? I think we're going sort of widely apart there, and that's a pity, because that's suboptimal, and I think that we could do a lot of work, not just managing the current situation and the current market, but even having a bit of a longer perspective and say, how do we solve those issues 10, 20 years from now? I agree with, I could see us working together on R&D in terms of biogas and biofuels. There's a huge area and a huge common market potential there. instruments in terms of the renewables issues. We could work on offshore wind together. The Baltic area is excellent for that, and we should sit down and find how we can establish these kind of things, because a lot of it has to do with the network connections, and that's where the grid comes in also, as Arne mentioned, is something that we should work on. There's good potential to find good solutions there. And energy efficiency was also mentioned. We could exchange some experience on how to work with interested parties, stakeholders in society to increase energy efficiency in terms of building standards, drive these issues through the European Union, but also work with the companies together in creating a competitive advantage there.
And what we could see also from the pictures shown here was that in Finland there is a gap that need to be filled, where you need more electricity than you produce if you don't do anything in the next 30 years. In Sweden we have actually the opposite situation, it seems, if you look at the prognosis from the energy agency, but it's not really true, because there will be close down of nuclear power plants, which you have not calculated into your prognosis.
It's included.
For 2030 you calculate that they will all be running, and not only running but also extremely efficient. So it might be, at least, that also Sweden will need to do some new investments in the next decades to meet this. And then we have to decide what way to go. So we have this energy security issue, we have the challenge from climate change and sustainability, and the economical sustainability that industries like Pöyry want to have, I guess, competitive electricity prices. So it's a huge challenge, I would say, in the future. What do you say, Tarja?
Yes, I think it's a huge challenge, and I think one of the things that came up here in an interesting way is this question of, should we give up on Europe and should we just do the Nordic thing? And somebody said that it's lost in the European process, and that we should just have the Nordic cooperation. I think your point on the invisible influence is very important. I think the Nordic countries have invisible influence in the Commission, in standardization work, in defining standards. And then the question of, we are asking for leadership. I think the question would be, why is there not Nordic leadership then in the EU energy questions?
The visible part, yeah.
Yeah, in the visible part. So if the visible part is lacking, then maybe we should focus on this visible part and say, what could be done there?
Mm. Anyone has an answer?
Yeah. Yes. No, I don't have an answer. I have more questions, actually. Yes. Yeah.
But very quickly on that the visible part, I think we are afraid of taking this longer term perspective and trying to create this complete picture. Because we're all used to having specialists, and we're dealing with issues in separate departments, and that just doesn't cut it for this type of issue.
But there is also from both Finland and Sweden an approach to say that let the market solve this, more or less. Anja?
Yeah, adding on to that, what I was actually saying is that I'm happy to hear that there is a lot of cooperation under the radar, but it doesn't seem to be visible above the radar. And what has happened to this good old Nordic Ministerråd? I mean, the ministerial cooperation in an energy question. I haven't seen for a long time any kind of joint statement that the energy policies on the Nordic countries should be blah, 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 or we should do next this and this and that. So I think there really is, as you said, a lot of cooperation on the expert level and influencing as an expert to this, that and the other. But the political voice is missing. And of course in the corridors of European Union, I mean, Finland is small, Sweden is small, Denmark is even smaller. But somehow we should have a joint
together we are bigger.
Yeah, at least a bit bigger. and really, if you look at in the energy policy, Denmark, they have done very good to EU lobbying and influence in EU, because all the 26 other EU countries think that Denmark is the model of the renewable energy and wind energy, and they are always speaking in one voice every day when they are in the EU. Should we in the Finland, Sweden, Denmark develop the same kind of approach, that when whoever is speaking has a policy agenda which is the same?
Interesting. Now we must try to take some questions from here. Let's take 2 questions. Do you have a microphone? Yes. We take 2 questions and then some comments. You had, well, raise your hands again. I think you can take this woman here. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yes.
My name is Kerstin Wennerstrand, and I would like to put up a warning finger concerning energy efficiency. Is it not? Could you hear me now?
Yes. Yep.
I would like to put up a warning finger concerning energy efficiency, because you're all talking of just energy in buildings. At least in Sweden, we have 9 technical essential requirements on buildings, and I know that you in Finland have almost the same. And energy is affecting almost all the others. So this will be disastrous, for instance, especially concerning ventilation, which have been worked with a lot during my working time. The other is goals from EU. I think that EU should, or the Commission and Parliament and whatsoever, should keep to goals. EU should keep to goals and make it possible for the member states to interpret according to, as Rico said, according to the climate, for instance. Otherwise, it will be disastrous. So I would like to hear your comments on that, because when we are talking about other requirements, there should be, at least in Sweden, other authorities talking about that.
Thank you. Thank you. You can give it to the man behind you.
Can I ask the question now?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Yes, you were talking about security, and to the power plants, they can be bombed or terrorized, but there is a reactor called the thorium reactor. It can be built so that it can stop by itself, so we do not have a new Fukushima or other nuclear problem. And if there is research on that, and they have built such thorium reactors before, and I wonder if Sweden has still this, if it's allowed to do research on nuclear power plants. And the waste from the thorium reactors, they have a very short half-life, so the waste is not so dangerous. So within a couple of 100 years, it will not be very dangerous or not dangerous at all.
Thank you.
And I'm from Amoristena, so you can read there perhaps about this later.
We can take one more question before we have Mr. Tynkynen here.
Actually, it's not a question, it's a comment on Tarja Kronberg's discussion of Canada as a strategic partner in bioeconomy with the Nordic countries and with Europe in general. I would underline that Russia would be a perfect bioeconomy partner, because if you think of the northwestern Russian territories and also the regional objectives concerning their diversification of their own energy mix in, for example, Arkhangelsk, Karelia, that would very much fit into the objectives that we have in the Nordic countries. Also production-wise, pellets, briquettes and so on, but also technology-wise.
So we could cooperate on bio instead of oil and nuclear. Well, so a few questions. I think at least, Erik, there was one question that was for you about this thorium reactor, and is it interesting for Sweden? Are you even allowed to do some research about it if you would like?
Yes, we are allowed to do research. The issue is that this research is often very expensive, and with the changing political climate over a long-term period of time also, it's very difficult to say, yes, we're going to put X billion into research in terms of nuclear reactors. But there's some smaller projects ongoing, and also Sweden is cooperating in European research projects on a fourth generation nuclear reactors, but that's that's international cooperation. There's little, I'd say, research and development going on currently in Sweden as such. Sponsored by either sort of our agency or the Science Council. But there's no formal.
Do you have any research on thorium reactors?
I'm not quite sure. Not a very wide program. At least it's allowed, of course. But I would return to the question of uranium fuel, actually, and because it's not such a simple question. There's uranium ore. It's the enrichment of the ore. It's the enrichment of the fuel, and there's the actual production of the fuel.
And then there's the fuel after you used it.
Yes, but there we have a solution, as you know.
Yeah, you do.
We have the first one in the world having a solution to that. I'm happy to say, but the question of dependency of Russia, we have the Loviisa power plant since 1978 or 9, and fuel has been bought also from the West. It's all possible, but of course you need to plan it. It takes some years to produce the uranium fuel.
So, Tarja, the comment on the cooperation with Russia on biofuels. You can ask a question afterwards. Yes.
Let me comment on the Russian issue. I agree that Russia would be a very good partner for bioeconomy. And the problem is just that the EU has decided to isolate Russia. So it's actually the policy not to have cooperation with Russia. It will probably change. And the foreign minister of Russia just yesterday said that Russia doesn't want to lose the European and the US energy market. So I think there's an opening and there's a deterrent. This conflict has been escalating, and now hopefully it will de-escalate a bit. But I think there will be a continuous consciousness within the European Union, whether it's good or bad, I don't know, about the vulnerability in relation to Russia. And so therefore I do think that there will be diversified projects. I mean, the European Union is 50% self-sufficient. So the rest of 50%, somehow it has to be managed. And I think that it will be a package of different things where Russia hopefully will be one part. I would like to comment this question about the goals, that the European Union should only deal with goals and then leave it to the countries to interpret. I think this is the practice. I mean, this is actually the practice of the European Union, to define goals and then leave it to the countries to sort of, in unofficial, uncoordinated way, to try to find their ways. But if you want a common energy policy and climate policy for Europe, then you have to do more than define the common goals. Then you also have to give some guidelines for the interpretation and sanction them if they are not held.
Do you have any comment on this issue of, well, energy efficiency, and there are other goals as well, with, for example, buildings? It's not only that they should be energy efficient.
I think it's important to not, you know, Brussels will never rule over Europe. We have to change our view on what we can do on the European level. The member states will have to take a much more active part and cooperate, use Europe as a cooperation mechanism and solve common solutions. And that sort of view isn't there. And that hinders a lot of things that should and could happen. You can see where you have been able to cooperate for appliances, for example. It has appliances. The effect has been tremendous. If you look into what sort of white goods you can buy today and compare that, I worked as a researcher in the 80s, and we could not even dream of that sort of market access to that sort of solutions. So I think there are a lot of things to do. Building standards, I think, is quite complicated, but it's possible to do more at least. And you can cooperate, I say, regionally in some issues, and on the whole European level. You have to be open to both. But the most important thing is to view it as a way of solving problems together, not as being fooled around by some bureaucrat sitting in Brussels.
Okay, so we are running a bit out of time, but if it's okay with Nanan, I will take a few more questions before I give the word to you. So please come with a microphone. We have a few more questions. We have one over there.
Thank you. I'm Bo Hjalström from Global Challenge, formerly at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. I think it's clear from this interesting afternoon that we need more political cooperation on these issues. We also need some more institutional cooperation. But I would like to claim that we also need more financial cooperation, particularly when it comes to renewables that the market doesn't provide fully. Therefore, I think we should look for new ways of innovative financing models for financing what we have discussed today. And one very simple thing, I think, compared to many others, would be to start where we already are, with the Nordic Finance Group in Helsinki. As you may know, we have 4 Nordic finance institutions in Helsinki. They are together in one building in Helsinki. They are not cooperating almost at all. They have a lot of competence in these areas. They have mandates in these areas, and they have considerable financing. I think that merits to have a new look into what these institutions might create and be forthcoming in these areas. So that would be my comment, and also little tips for you on how to proceed. Thank you.
Yes. We have one comment over there, or maybe a question, you never know. Is it actually a question?
Yes. Eric, one question to you. You said that Sweden is doing really fine when it comes to renewable versus the goal set towards 2020. Isn't it time to expand the system of L certificates and increase the goal? And what would be a challenging yet achievable level for 2030 period?
It's a very concrete question. We have one more comment from here, and then we'll give each one of you like 30 seconds to answer whatever question you like and comment on whatever you like. Okay, please. So, short, please.
General Director Huttunen, as I had my first question about securities, not securities with war and so, but sureness that we can have in future. We know what has happened these years. We had all the time productions from Russia coming over to Finland, but we don't know, I don't say the name, but one certain person in the leading that country. And we don't know what kind of ideas he get to look west. Now he had that agreement written last week, but what he do next year? He might be change his mind.
Okay, thank you. So, well, I'll give...
okay, we don't know the future.
We don't know the future.
I mean...
Yeah. Yes, and I mean, of course, it is a very much discussed in Finland about the dependency on Russia. So, do you want to start, Riku? Comment on that and whatever more you like to say about this future for our countries and energy security in green way forward?
Yeah. What I would like to underline is that we should work together in Europe and concentrate on the essential. It was a nice discussion on should we have those basic goals or should we go further. What I know, we shouldn't go to the direction which Energy Efficiency Directive shows, which is going to too much details, too many options, and that's what I mean by better regulation. Let's concentrate on the essential.
Yes, Tarja.
My 30 seconds would be on the question of Russia and the gas and oil dependency. I think the Ukrainian crisis has been a problem, and I hope that the European Union doesn't put on gas and oil sanctions. The European countries will be split, and I think what we need now is more cooperation in the European field and not different things that will split us. Besides, the European idea of peace is based on trade relations. And so the more trade relations we have with Russia, and this is my basic point, the more probability is there for peace.
That was the original idea.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we should keep to this original idea.
Yeah.
But better on biofuels than on oil.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Erik.
That was very good. I have a question to answer also. So do I still get only 30?
Yes.
Okay. You're very hard, Maria.
Yes.
Good question. Of course, this is a question that the politicians in Sweden need to answer. Shall we have an additional target, and shall we then also expand? Yeah, I'm answering the question
We're talking about the Swedish
there.
electricity certificate.
And the electricity certificate system is then also a continuation, whether or not. One aspect I can add to your question without really answering it is it would be interesting to ask ourselves, do we need particular other instruments to stimulate development of other types of renewable energy? I'm thinking of, for example, offshore wind. Again, or bioenergy, where we need to go into areas. And maybe then we need a support system that also tries to get that a bit further, which is not technology neutral.
So you had a question not to answer, and now you can comment on the discussion.
No, but I think that I can close up by saying we need to cooperate together, because there's a lot of value at stake for both our countries. And I'm afraid that if we don't increase our cooperation on this longer term perspective, that this value will get lost and will mean that we end up in a less competitive and also a less positive position within Europe.
Anja?
About the same thing, that I think the conclusion is that we really do need to cooperate more, even before going to the concrete targets. So if you don't cooperate more on the political level, our joint efforts will be lost if we don't have our saying in the EU level, independent on how much power we shift from the member states to the EU. So definitely there has to be means and ways to cooperate more, even to have a political statements.
Arne.
First of all, I would like to underline that we have to make a difference between the immediate crisis and the long-term solutions. But for most solutions are long-term. But I think it can, in best case, lead to stronger European cooperation in the energy field. And there I think it's really important to make the Nordic voice heard and seen. But that also means that we need to have a Nordic voice. So there is some sort, as I said earlier on, a dialogue process that is lacking to to create the voice needed. And because there are a lot of similarities between the Nordic countries. And we can do a lot, much more, if we cooperate.
We can do a lot together. That is the solution. That is the result of this discussion, I think, that we could do a lot together. And this might be a start for some further cooperation. We have some already, but there might be more in the future. And we will invite Nanan Lundin from the Global Challenge to say a few finishing words, and at the same time we will give our panel a big applause. And thank you very much for participating.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, please let me once again thank all the keynote speakers and our panelists for not only insightful but also very much open-hearted discussion today. I think it's very much appreciated. So I would also like to say a few words from my heart, which is not written on the paper after I've heard all this. Having working with, or more precisely, have been stucking with the European energy and climate policy and the international energy and climate policy and even the Chinese energy and climate policy, I do miss the spirit and the voice from Nordic countries. So in this context, I think that we do need a strong Nordic voice in Europe and in the world. So having that said, I am a strong believer of a Nordic model in Europe. In particular, in the world, we need not only leadership, but also showcase. So the Nordic model with like-minded alliance in Europe for example, in Germany, I think that is the greenest regional approach we should start with. So this is global warming is working for and fighting for. So I'm very much proud of that. So firstly, I think, what is the takeaway from today's seminar? We know that energy security and energy independence is important. We also know that industry and economic competitiveness is also important. So a low carbon transformation is not feasible, not attractive, if we have to achieve it by killing our jobs without being able to creating new and decent ones. But at the same time, I think we do need rethinking how to achieve the security and independence and how to gain and regain the competitiveness. So I think Nordic countries, not least Finland and Sweden, have unique challenges in this process, but at the same time, we cannot forget that we have also unique strengths, because here we are talking about two of the most innovative countries. Having working at OECD 4 years and look at the statistics, I know for sure, every year either Finland or Sweden will be the most innovative countries in the world. But I'm missing this argument, this in the energy and the climate policy. I think there's something we need to think about more. And in terms of investment, having all these framework conditions, I do believe that actually Sweden and Finland, the Nordic countries, should be the most attractive regions for the best investment from all over the world. So the Nordic experience and in the past, and also the potential we have, I think we can see that security, competitiveness, really should and can go hand in hand with sustainability. So to be able to achieve this, I think we need the political leadership and business leadership more than ever. So how to deal with the energy security challenge? Through enlarged cooperation and integration, instead of using costly and less effective homemade solutions, and how to gain and restore competitiveness through transformational changes and the new industry dynamics, not through the race to the bottom at cost of social values and ecological sustainability. I think that's the challenges for everybody here in the room, and also for our politicians and the business leaders in other countries and all over the world. So I think to answer these questions, we need common values, and we need the trust and the transparency, and we need innovation capacity. So who have that? Nobody else have more than this than Nordic countries. That's my strong belief. So in this context, I think that Finland and Sweden and other Nordic countries have all the possibilities to lead the development towards that directions. So we heard several times that Nordic countries should show the way. So how to show it? So in my personal view, I think we should show it with a clean and smart energy transformation and diplomacy. This is very much needed in Europe and in the world. So finally, I would like to say, at a personal level, I am very much encouraged by the discussion, because I think Global Morning has put all resources working on the Nordic energy action groups, NAG. So from this discussion, we see that we are at the frontier of the policy agenda through working with the collaboration with Nordic countries and Germany, and through working on transportation issues, which is not a Nordic challenge, but also a global one, and through starting with discussion on the Nordic green banks. So finally, I would like to say that thank you so much and for sharing this with us today. And all of you are more than welcome to get back to you if you want more information on the NAG. And also, I would most sincerely to thank Finland's Institute. This is the first time we work together, and you see that it's not only efficient but also very fruitful, and we are very much looking forward to future collaboration. Okay, thank you all.